Testing, 1, 2. Well, actually, let me just, I was going to move a distance.
Okay, good morning. Good morning to members of the press, to the national community. This morning, we are extremely pleased to be here at the office of the Leader of the Opposition in Port of Spain to proceed with a very important press conference that would relate to several matters in the national domain. We find it necessary to do these weekly press conferences because we believe that the PNM and Dr. Keith Rowley have severely weakened the Parliament as an institution and as the voice of the people. They have perverted its role and functions, and we believe they have altered the standing orders in a way that defies constitutional principles and values. In the Parliament, Dr. Rowley and the PNM have embarked on a pattern of undermining the Parliament and the parliamentary opposition, effectively undermining the system of parliamentary democracy in a very dangerous way. This, we believe, is an attempt to create an elective dictatorship in which they may have it that there will be no opposition whatsoever. We, as the official opposition in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, will not let Dr. Rowley and the PNM get away with this dastardly plot. We intend to raise our voices in the Parliament and outside in order to give representation to the over 309,000 persons who voted for the United National Congress. We intend to give them and the rest of the national community an effective voice. And in doing so, we will be meeting weekly, and we will be meeting during the week in other fora to take this fight to the PNM and Dr. Rowley. So again, welcome. This morning, I'm joined by a veteran politician, former House Speaker and Minister of Government, and of course, a leader of the opposition bench in the Senate, the Honorable Senator Wade Mark, who is our Shadow Minister of Public Administration and Digital Information. This morning, I will speak briefly on a few matters which we would like to reiterate and also to develop on. As you know, in the Parliament, the government has used the guise of COVID-19 to curtail, to abbreviate, to cut the speaking time of members of Parliament. We have done the research and we believe this is the only Commonwealth Parliament that has embarked on that course of action. In other parliaments, they will meet and they have not curtailed, abbreviated, or sought to cut the speaking time of members of Parliament. So this has happened in Trinidad and Tobago. So it means that in Parliament, we do not have the time that we did before. They have done this in a way that we believe is a violation of the standing orders and the Constitution. Having said that, a very dangerous pattern has emerged in parliamentary debates. And as someone with the experience, I can tell you, the PNM has embarked upon a program led by Dr. Rowley, Mr. Dial Singh, Mr. Alwari, Mr. Young, and others, in which they seek at all material times to interrupt, to stop the presentations of several members of the opposition who they have targeted, and includes some of course, the new members of the Parliament. It was a very disgusting and disgraceful sight on Wednesday last, January 27th, to see front bench members of the PNM seeking to interrupt and stop members of Parliament from speaking. In one case, I believe the member for Couva North was on his legs, and they made 3 interruptions in 60 seconds in what would be a 20-minute presentation. So that their attempt, it is to disrupt, it is to smother, it is to oppress, and it is, of course, to derail the opposition in its presentations. And they have targeted specifically some members of the opposition who they believe they can railroad. This is something I want to condemn. I believe is disgraceful. Parliament and our members must have the opportunity to speak. We have reached a stage now where if you use one word twice, that is called tedious repetition. Now, that was never the intention of Parliament. To begin with, tedious repetition was at a time when you had 75 minutes to talk. So conceivably, someone could speak for 25 minutes on a matter that was already aired. It is called tedious repetition. Today, I think if you use the word crime twice, it's called tedious repetition. And this is really disheartening. It's disheartening. And it undermines effective parliamentary debate, and it undermines representation. That, to me, is the point. Now, on the last Wednesday, there was a disgusting and disgraceful event. We have done the research, and it is the first time it has happened in Trinidad and Tobago on a private member's bill, a private member's motion. Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, the opposition leader member for Siparia, filed a motion of no confidence in the Minister Stuart Young. It is common practice, acceptable by all in our Commonwealth parliamentary practice, that the mover of the motion will wind up the motion. On Private Members' Day, that carries even more sanctity because it is the only day in 1 month that the opposition can bring a motion. Otherwise, every other motion, conceivably, is a government motion, and the government can wind up their own motion. The government had an option to allow the member for Siparia to wind up her motion, and because the motion is critical of the government, they can speak after. So they will always have the last say, so to speak. The Parliament has an inbuilt provision that if a motion is critical of the government from the opposition, the government has the right to have the last word. The government has the numbers as well. So it is not a question of voting. The government will always have a numerical advantage. That is why they're the government. So it is not a question of the numbers. It is not a question of having the last say. It is a question of malice. It is a disgraceful contempt for parliamentary tradition. And Mr. Dayal Singh, acting as leader of government business, rose. He rose, look at the record, for what is called a procedural motion. It is to extend the time for debate. It happens around 7:45. I was leader of the House. I did that for 5 years. At 7:45, there's a procedural motion. I beg to move that we continue debate, When he got up for that, he then moved immediately to put a question, to put a question to the floor to terminate the debate effectively. Just for the record, it is Standing Order 52-1, and it says, and I just quote, after a question has been proposed, any member, meaning after debate start and so on, any member may at any time during the course of the debate rise in his place and move that the question be now put. All that means is that they can stand up any time and say, look, let us put the question, meaning let's end the debate. Unless it appears to the chair that that motion is an abuse of the rules of the House or an infringement of the rights of the minority, the question that the question be now put shall be immediately put, and there will be no debate. Now, all of that tells us one thing, is that the chair, the speaker, believed, as she is entitled to believe, that there was no infringement of the minority rights, that this was not an abuse of the rules. But if for the government to do that is disgraceful. It has never happened before. I rose to complain. I said it was a travesty, it was unjust, it was unfair. The leader of the opposition was in the Parliament. She was in the Parliament, prepared, able, and willing to wind up her motion. They ignored that and railroaded the Parliament to end the debate. Now, what were they scared about? What was Mrs. Prasad Bisesa coming to say that had the government, the PNM, that had Stuart Young in mortal fear that they did not want to hear her for 20 more minutes? That is the question. Now, when a revelation was made the next day concerning a bottling plant, we had a clue. We had the first clue that there was something that they did not want us to go on record with, because Mrs. Prasad Bisesa had raised a matter of persons coming in the country and not going into state quarantine. When we raised that, they said they are diplomats. When we looked at the list, we realized not all were diplomats. Then they stopped. So they were in mortal fear of what she had to say. And then they disgracefully ended that debate. In fact, on our side, I believe the member for Caroni East did not speak. And he was able and willing to speak at that time. So we want to condemn that approach. It is the first time it has happened in our parliamentary history. I pray it is the last, that this will not rear its ugly head again. And the government ought not to have done that. Is a dangerous precedent that they have now created. However, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa assured the national community, and we assure you, that whatever information she was going to release, of course, she will do so in the coming days on the national platform. We have several Monday night virtual meetings. We have several other engagements. Senator Mark will speak to that later. That to us was a very important matter. The second issue I'll just raise very briefly is a statement made by Dr. Rowley. On the Friday before the THA election, Dr. Keith Rowley, on a platform in Tobago, said that he had information and intelligence that the opposition in Trinidad was in some way involved with the developments in Tobago. We were very clear that the United National Congress was not involved. We did not field candidates. We were not campaigning. We monitored as everybody else did from the newspaper. We were not involved. But what was frightening to us in the opposition is that Keith Rowley, as chairman of the National Security Council, made a statement that as chairman, information has come to him, which he then releases on a political platform. This is dangerous to our democracy. It is deadly. This is a blow to democracy. A prime minister cannot use intelligence obtained at National Security Council. And we want to say it is a lie. To start with, if such information is released or collated, it is a lie. We have not been involved in that Tobago election in any which way. In fact, some of us, if we wanted to go and bathe in the beach, we were scared. We said once we land in Tobago, they would say, look, you come to campaign. So we denied ourselves a vacation because we just did not want to be at the same scene. Dr. Rowley did this, and I want to remind the national community, in 1997, Dr. Rowley filed a motion in Parliament against then Prime Minister Basteu Pandey, accusing Mr. Pandey, Prime Minister, of using intelligence gathered in the National Security Council and taking it on the political platform. He said, be it resolved that this Honorable House condemn the political use to which the security services are reportedly being put and the public use by the Prime Minister in a political capacity of privileged information so obtained. This is Keith Rowley in 1997, speaking of former Prime Minister Basteu Pandey. He repeats the same crime, the same offense, for which he moved an entire motion in 1997. Dr. Rowley must be condemned in the strongest possible way. And we will consider in the coming days whether such a motion, and we don't have to rewrite it. Dr. Rowley wrote the motion in 1997. We will just, in fact, we could probably take it as it is and refile it and go after him for that dastardly act. It is not whether the intelligence is correct or not, and I put it to you, it is not correct. It is you cannot use information from National Security Council and go on a political platform. This is undermining democracy. And he spoke, in that time, I think he spoke for 75 minutes, not 20. And we must check, I'm almost certain he was given the right to wind up. Yes. In that motion, he was given the right to wind up his motion that he brought against former Prime Minister Basteu Pandey, accusing Mr. Pandey of the very same offense that he commits today. So that he is a hypocrite of the highest order, and I say that without apology, to be engaging in this type of cruel, dastardly acts undermining national security. And Dr. Rowley, I had the opportunity to read his speech in its entirety. And he made a point here which I'll remind him. He said when a prime minister does that, they undermine the integrity of the security services. They undermine the work of the police and other agencies in government by politicizing their work. I remind him of that today. And the question we would raise as well in the coming days is, who else is Dr. Rowley spying on? If he is spying using information, admittedly by him, on opposition members of parliament and so on, who else is he spying on? Is it members of the judiciary? Is it members of the protective services? Is it members of, business, trade unions, youth leaders, social activists? Because I can say outside of parliament that in a joint select committee meeting on national security, the Minister of National Security put information in the public domain which suggested that he was spying on Commissioner Gary Griffith. So that they are involved in a web of spying on anyone and any institution they deem to be in opposition to them. And that is a matter we'll take further. The last point I would make, of course, before I hand over to Senator Mark, is we, of course, express deep concern and will not speak at all on matters pertaining to the kidnapping of young Andrea Barrett in Arima or thereabout. It is a matter solely, of course, in the hands of the protective agencies, and we wish that would come to a quick resolution and the child would be safe and recovered and so on. But we want to take the opportunity to remind the Prime Minister, Keith Rowley, months ago in the Parliament, he said he was seeking expert advice outside of the Commissioner. The Commissioner went on record to recommend that non-lethal devices that can be removed from the prohibition list and so on, that we can legislate and get in the hands, particularly of vulnerable women, female workers who at all time of the night are required to be on the streets and taxis and so on. We were asking, and we share Commissioner Griffith's view, that those weapons should be made available to members of the national community, and particularly vulnerable female workers, students, and so on, as the case may be. And Dr. Rowley said, notwithstanding Commissioner Griffith's statement that he needed, quote-unquote, expert advice, which clearly was not the Commissioner in his mind. So after all those months, we have reached nowhere closer to solving that matter, and we again call for the Parliament and the Attorney General and the Prime Minister to make a policy change that would deal with the minor legislative hiccups involved and would lead to a situation where non-lethal devices, non-fatal devices could be placed in the hands of the vulnerable to protect themselves. It is not a question that it will necessarily bring an end to this type of criminal activity, but at least it would give those potential victims, it will give them a chance that they can ward off their attackers, ward off likely predators, who now lurk in the taxis, the PH cars, and so on, that they can help. And we call upon the government to review this urgently in light of this recent kidnapping development. I will leave it at that, and Senator Mark, I believe, will take over, and we can take some questions after. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, my colleague, Dr. Unilal, Member of Parliament for Urpuch East. Good morning to members of the media. I would like to focus on the whole subject of procurement, because as you know, procurement, legislation that is necessary and crucial for the promotion of a healthy economy and a flourishing democracy. It means that the hijacking, literal stealing, or thieving of public money contributes to widespread deprivation of basic goods and services and other works needed by the public, whether it is hospital equipment, whether it is bed in the hospitals, for the hospitals rather, whether it has to do with pharmaceuticals, tablets and laptops for our children, jobs for our youths who are currently unemployed, and other critical goods, services, and works. It is abundantly clear that procurement is absolutely essential to be under what is called an independent oversight agency or mechanism. We know in Trinidad and Tobago that close to $170 billion, an average of $35 billion per year, is spent on goods services, and other works by close to 200 government state agencies, be they state enterprises, statutory authorities, ministries. So we are talking about not simple $35,000. We are not talking about $35 million. We are talking about 35 billion TT dollars being spent annually by the PNM without any oversight or independent mechanism to supervise that spending. So this is absolutely important that in 2021, in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, we have to believe the word of the Prime Minister when he tells us and tells the people of Trinidad and Tobago that all is well with the awards of contracts. Everything is above board. Well, that is a banana republic status that we don't want any part of. In any civilized and modernized society, you have what is called an independent oversight machinery looking and examining and scrutinizing the awards of contracts. That is why in 2010, with the intervention of private sector organizations and civil society groupings, we in the United National Congress, at that time a part of the People's Partnership, led by the distinguished Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa, accepted the challenge and moved rapidly to bring into being public procurement and disposal of public property assets, or legislation rather. It took us about 4 years, but by September, after attempts by the PNM, led by this Dr. Christopher Rowley, to undermine, sabotage the whole exercise, we were able to win that battle. And in September of 2014, the both houses by that time passed the legislation. You know what is even more ironic? In the Senate, where 2 days was spent in the committee stage of this piece of legislation to ensure that we crossed all the I's and dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, we got unanimity. There was a unanimous vote. 28 persons voted in favor of the legislation. You know who were among those 28? Faris Alwari, Camille Robinson Regis, and the butler of the Prime Minister, Warren Stuart Young. They voted, among others, for the procurement legislation. When it came to the House of Representatives, Rowley and his gang voted against the legislation at the time. I think at that time, Rudy, they abstained, if I'm not mistaken. But they did not support the legislation at that time. In their manifesto in 2015, in public utterances subsequently, in budget after budget, 2015, 2016, 2016, 2017, 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020, Mr. Imbert, the Minister of Finance, promised to proclaim the public procurement legislation. Mr. Imbert promised to bring the regulations necessary to give effect and life to the public procurement legislation, to come and bring those things to the Parliament so that Trinidad and Tobago, after our Constitution was approved in 1962, and then in 1976, Republican status. The most important document written in our country's history since 62 Constitution was the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, which is known as Act 2015. I think it's Act 14 of 2015. You know what happened? They just mamagai, misled, peddled a campaign of misinformation and disinformation. So what did they do? They empower. In 2016, Mr. Imbert brought an amendment to the procurement legislation, saying he establishing a review board. And the review board, that mechanism, was already inherent and enshrined in the legislation. But as a stalling tactic, as a delaying tactic, as an attempt to stymie the legislation, he brought an amendment. You know, up to now, the review board has not been established. And this thing was established in 2016, the amendment. Not satisfied, he came back in 2017 with another amendment to the public procurement legislation. To do what? He reduced the term, the tenure of office of every office holder under that legislation. The procurement regulator had a term of 7 years. He brought it down to 5. The other members had 5 years. He brought it down to 3. And some, I think, it's 3 levels, from 7 to 5. I think there was 5 to 4. And then those who had 4 years, he brought them down to 3 years. So right now, that is what he did in 2017. You know what he also did? When we were debating this matter, the recommendation for the procurement regulator in terms of salary was $150,000 a month, to avoid this person from being tempted to corrupt the process. You know what Imbert did in 2017? He brought it down to $50,000. But as we speak today, the CEO of CAL is receiving $150,000. But you couldn't give the regulator $150,000. That was the second amendment he brought in order to gut and stifle, undermine, destroy public procurement. And then the final nail was placed in the coffin of the public procurement regime when the shameless government piloted a third amendment in December of 2020. This time, they are bold-faced thieves. They are bold-faced thieves. What these criminals did in the Parliament by gutting the procurement legislation, they were able to remove from oversight of the independent procurement regulator and his board the following services. Financial services. Who is going to determine that? The Duane of Maraval. The Duane of Maraval. The man who is billing at almost taxpayers' expense, because there's evidence to show that. 20 apartments on Picton Street. He doesn't know his right place in history. It's either you're a businessman or you are a politician. You can't be both at the same time serving the people. Take a side. You know, so these fellas said, all financial services gone. Who will determine that? The Minister of Finance. All legal services. They make a song and a dance against the People's Partnership. Alwari came to Parliament, said we spent $1 billion in legal services. You know what them fellas did in 2020? They don't want no oversight of legal services. So that is to be determined by the Minister of Finance and the Cabinet. All audit and accounting services to be determined by who? The Minister of Finance. All medical services to be determined by who? The Minister of Finance. And he come with a catch-all phrase. He said, any other services that they deem necessary. These people believe we are living in a banana republic, and they are an emperor. The Prime Minister is an emperor. And they now tell us that they will determine which other services they will by order include for the minister to unilaterally, whimsically, and arbitrarily determine. That is what these criminals did. This is Alibaba and 40 thieves in charge of Trinidad and Tobago today. They went further. All government-to-government contracts. They don't want no oversight. They went further. All treaties, technical cooperation, international loan agreement, private-public partnership agreements, all of those things, not within the purview of the independent supervisor or regulator. Who must deal with that? The Cabinet, led by who? Dr. Rowley, and include who? Imbert, Faris Alwari, Stuart Young. Stuart Young had to recuse himself 57 times in the last 5 years from cabinet meetings. You know why? Conflict of interest. His family and relatives were getting the contracts, so he had to leave. They are about seeing about themselves and their families and their financiers. And this man called Alwari, who talked a lot of nonsense last Friday, saying that Trinidad and Tobago is making what? Tremendous strides in fighting corruption. This man is shameless. He is collecting at the end of each month close to $640,000 on a building on Tragridge Road. The man is conflicted. That is corruption. That is an abuse of office. That is using private office in order, public office rather, to realize public gain. That is what this thing is about. So that is what they did. And what we are saying, ladies and gentlemen, that is wrong. That is why we have described the PNM government. We say the PNM government is like a vicious vampire, vacuuming the public vault for their friends, families, and financiers. That is what the PNM is doing. Where in the world can you go and justify tea-free? Where in the world can you go and legalize tea-free? But in Trinidad and Tobago, they have brought legislation, weaponized legislation, to allow them to legally thief from the public purse. That is what that is about. And because of that, we have done our research. So when they talk about government-to-government contracts, they don't want us to see. They want us to deal with any assets that they are buying. We have no, in other words, we must trust Dr. Rowley. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I have some documents I want you all to, and this is not Wade Mark's document. These you can find on the Parliament website. This is the credit agreement with EFIC of Australia for the INCAT and something called the APT James, built by who? INCAT of Tasmania, Pty Limited, and the other one built by Austral Ships, Pty Limited. You know what is the combined cost of those two vessels? $1.079 billion. These two vessels. You know who took the decision? Rowley, Stuart Young, and his cabinet. So they bought two vessels valued at $1 billion. But the people of Trinidad and Tobago don't know if they thief or if they're thief. We don't know what are the terms and conditions of this, because when you read this thing, this and nothing is the same. Up to now in these documents, you cannot tell Trinidad and Tobago how much money did we borrow for the INCAT from EFIC and how much money we borrow for the APT James. What we have is a maximum and 80% of the maximum. What is that? That doesn't tell us anything. We want to know how much money the government borrowed for these two vessels. But you know how we can see that? The shipbuilders, the shipbuilding agreements, the shipbuilding contracts between Hostal and the government is what we need to see. But we don't have that. They give us credit agreement with EFIC. What is more alarming is this document here. On the 9th of April, these two documents were signed. But you know what? EFIC did not see the trick in these two documents. We have two other documents that we can't find. We're asking them for it. That is the two vessels they bought for the Coast Guard. Two Cape-class vessels. The documents for those things cannot be seen. The shipbuilding contracts cannot be seen. We want to see those things. You know what EFIC discovered? In this document, I'm talking about Hostal, not INCAT. This seems to be a little more decent. The company that is now facing criminal charges for corruption in Australia is Hostal. You know how these fellas if you go to this document, and I want you, it is on the website, hear how these fellas define contract price. Contract price. Contract price is supposed to be the amount of money they're paying for our vessel. Contract price. Hear how them define contract price. And our Attorney General vetted this document, you know. He vetted this document. The Cabinet approved this document. Rowley approved this document. Stuart Young approved this document. Hear what they define contract price to mean. Contract price means the basic purchase price as such term is defined in the contract. What does that mean? You understand what that means? I don't. This is what they give us in the Parliament. You go to INCAT agreement. Let's see what INCAT Tasmania defined as contract price. Contract price means not the basic terms of basic purchase price. Contract price means the contract price as such term is defined in the contract. Is the contract price. Here they are saying, no, it is the basic purchase price. Well, here we're going. They were trying something. We have questions that we want to ask them because I will let you know. Because, you know, the best disinfectant for secrecy is the sunshine of transparency, accountability, integrity, and value for money. Decision making must always be in the interest of the public and not the powerful. And that is what these fellows have done. So let me just share with you briefly before I bring my part to a close. I have a piece here called, look, there are so many questions, and we have to have a special conference. PRO, I have cabinet minutes, you know. This is the scandal of the century. The purchase of these two so-called fast catamaran ferries and the two Cape-class vessels. It is a scandal of the century. Corruption, corruption, corruption involved in the purchase of these assets. But it's a good thing we have something called EFIC, because they went by ethic for money. But you know, they went by ethic for money. But based on our research, ladies and gentlemen, I want to share with you why they went by ethic for money. We did our homework, and we have seen that in the case of the two fast patrol, the two fast ferries, we have paid close to $617 million combined. We have it in cabinet minutes. The two vessels cost $1 billion. So far, we have expended, using US currency, $617 million for these two fast ferries. So if it's $1 billion, we're supposed to be balancing $400 million. We want the government to come clean. And in the case of the so-called Cape-class vessels, we are seeing where the government has paid out a sizable amount of money. We have estimated so far, here now, the Cape-class vessels, we are told by Ostal, cost 126 million Australian. When you convert that to US dollars, it comes to 96.7. When you convert that to TT, it's $655 million. Dr. Rowley, in Mind Your Business, in January of 2019, told Trinidad and Tobago that those two vessels will cost us $600 million. We are now seeing $655. No explanation for it. No explanation. In a cabinet note, they said that these two vessels will cost $605 million. $605 million for the two vessels. But why is we paying $605 million for these two vessels? In 2011, the Australian Royal Navy borrowed from the Australian National Bank on behalf of their institution monies to buy two Cape-class vessels, same size, 58 meters long. 28 men could hold on board. It could stay out there for 28 days. You know how much I pay for it? The equivalent of $300 million for the two vessels. The two vessels cost the Australian Royal Navy in 2011, which was delivered in 2015 or thereabout, for $300 million. We are being told in Trinidad and Tobago that these vessels are costing us $600 million. My last point is simply this: the credit agreement. They signed the credit agreement on the 9th of April. Imbert signed it with his permanent secretary. It is in this document. You know what EFIC had to do? EFIC called them back on the 9th of May. On the 1st of May. This is the letter. On the 1st of May. And you know what EFIC said? You have to redefine contract price. They got Imbert, who initially signed off on contract price with Ostal to mean basic purchase price. EFIC had to call them back in to sign a document before they released any monies to Trinidad and Tobago, and said contract price means the total contract price. But you know what they had in their original document? The basic purchase price. So this thing could go anywhere at any time. It just keep rising and rising. So imagine the Australian government through EFIC call out this government. Call out this government. Because they were going to borrow money from that bank, the EFIC Corporation, that is the Export Finance and Insurance Corporation of Australia. They were going to borrow money, and these fellas don't know what and how much and for what. And this is that contract price. You had to sign off to that. And they had to sign off to that. It's in this document. So, ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about procurement, this is what we're talking about. This is an example why you need the independent supervisor or supervision of these kinds of transactions. So, because the procurement regulator is not involved, because the government has taken it upon itself to buy these vessels without any oversight, these are some of the issues that have arisen. And there are many others, but we just don't have the time to deal with those today. I'll pause at this time and entertain any questions.
Members of the President, two points I'd just like to raise before we take the questions. There's been another matter in the public domain, and the political leader of the United National Congress and the opposition leader issued a statement within the last 24 hours or so. I just want to repeat that and reiterate that our issue with the exemption policy has never been the people specifically who come into the country by way of exemption. It is the people who have been locked out, our stranded citizens. This government has made vagrants out of Trinidad and Tobago citizens over the last year or so. Many of our citizens, elderly people and so on, persons without economic means, have had to be stranded to remain in very cold climates at times, without food, without water, without the basic provisions for life. They have remained, they have been knocking on the door to return to the country of their birth, and they were unable to do that. When we found out about persons being exempted on the guise of being diplomats, they were exposed. In fact, Stuart Young was exposed on Wednesday when we pointed out that the persons he was claiming were diplomats were not diplomats. In the last 24 hours or so, we have seen in the social media space in particular that persons connected with the Blue Waters bottling company have come in for some type of upgrade, workers and so on. We want to make the point categorically clear, as the opposition leader has stated, we have no difficulty with Blue Waters. We have no difficulty with the bottling plant. If it is that they applied properly, they got exemptions for persons to come in and do maintenance, upgrade and so on, we have no difficulty specifically with that. The difficulty we have is the lockout of thousands of our nationals and citizens, and the pain they experience every single day, and the lack of compassion of the government. Because their argument on Wednesday last is an interesting argument. When the COVID comes, the COVID don't discriminate as to a diplomat and not a diplomat. It don't discriminate as to somebody coming to upgrade the bottling water plant as opposed to another citizen coming in the country. The same risk you have of COVID spread, you will have whether there are workers coming in manufacturing or ordinary citizens who have been stranded coming back into the country. So it cannot be that you discriminate against one group in favor of another group. It cannot be that. So our issue has always been that the borders must be open on a phased basis, certainly to ensure that our nationals who are stranded abroad can come back. When this exemption matter was raised, I want to remind you in the Parliament, we flagged that issue and we said they will make a mockery of it, they will corrupt that system, it will not work. Just create a system where our nationals can come in. If it is 7-day state quarantine, you can hold 300 people. You have 300 people every 7 days or so. You can work out that easily. But this thing of giving preferential treatment to A, B, and C, leaving out D, E, that was a recipe for disaster, for chaos, for corruption. And I want to reiterate, as the opposition leader said, we have no difficulty specifically with the bottling plant. We have no difficulty with that if that is what they have to do to upgrade and so on. Our issue is not who came in, our issue is who have been prevented from returning to the land of their birth. The other issue, of course, relates to a matter raised in the public domain. We are not going to rest. They think we will forget, they think we will rest. We will remain wide awake on the issue of the helicopter and the debacle in New York in a circuit court, where Stuart Young went in the press in Trinidad, it is in a Sunday newspaper, he said the lawyers say they have no defense. Now, in a matter of a default judgment, he's saying that they have a defense, that they're putting in a defense. That has been mishandled, 100 million Trinidad and Tobago dollars up in the air, and it falls flatly and squarely to the feet of Stuart Young as Minister of National Security for the mishandling of that helicopter debacle based solely on malice. That is what it was. It was anything the UNCO Partnership Administration do is bad. So they left the helicopter parked up for 5 years, did nothing, did not pay rent, did not pay insurance, did not do maintenance. Today they face a default judgment, acknowledging they have no defense, and the taxpayer must foot $100 million. That, on that matter alone, Mr. Young should have resigned on Wednesday. But on Wednesday, I don't know if you saw what was happening. On Wednesday last, the government members did not choose to defend, they did not choose to speak on the performance of Minister Young. It was a surreal experience. They were queuing up like in a funeral. Everybody wanted to speak good of the deceased. So somebody came and said he's a good man. I think a lady from W. Mirror said he was handsome. Now beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So we have no problem. Minister Imbert said that he is a good man. He invited him for a beverage, and instead of going for the beverage, he went to see a flag. Now, the consecration of a flag in the fire service is an important matter, but that is not an achievement. A minister achievement is not going to a parade, a pass-out parade. It is not watching a flag. That is not the achievement of a government minister. And the government on Wednesday, I mean, in all fairness, I think it's only Keith Scotland, I think, tried to raise a couple matters of performance. And he couldn't anyway, but he tried. Every other member spoke as if, the fellow was walking on water. As if he was walking on water. And they could not defend his performance in office. And at the end, when they failed to defend him, it was an act of political gangsterism. It was political gangsterism to gang up and prevent the opposition from properly completing a motion of no confidence in Minister Stuart Young. And no amount of gallerying, no amount of lying, no amount, of grand charging will change the fact that Mr. Young has failed as Minister of National Security. I will leave it at that, and if need be, we can expand on some of these matters. Some questions?
Senator Mark, I'm not sure if I missed it, but where did you get the $1 billion from to
In a cabinet note. And let them say that is not true, and then we release it to you. We got it in a cabinet note that the two vessels, the amount is $1 billion. And in any event, and so on, I think Dr. Rowley would have made it public in the Parliament when he delivered a statement on the 19th of January, 2019. In the Hansard report, or the Hansard, you'll see a statement where he identified the total cost for the vessel built or being built, or that has not been built, by Incat Tasmania. I think it was 73.97 million. And then with Ostal, that too was given at around 68 million. And then they added another 5.5 million to that. So when you added up the 68 plus the 5.5 million, you would have gotten around 73. So that is US, eh? You multiply that by 680, and you'll get $1 billion. May I also say on the procurement matter that we remain very firm on our stance. The government must reinstate all the provisions in Section 7 of the Parent Act of 2015. They must repeal, by extension, the shameless decision they took using a simple majority to pass the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Act of 2020, which was assented to by the President on December 27th. We need to repeal that act. If they don't repeal it, we repeat. We will isolate you. We will isolate the PNM. We will expose the PNM. We will not cooperate with the PNM. We are not prepared to cooperate with a gang of thieves. They are legalizing banditry, thievery, and corruption in our country. And we want no part of those people. We stand for good governance in our country. We want transparency, we want accountability, we want honesty, we want value for money. That is what we want, and we demand. So I just wanted to make that point.
Any questions? Further questions?
You said the UNC had no involvement in THA elections whatsoever. Does this include any involvement with the PDP? What's in the party?
Absolutely none. The party, the United National Congress, was not involved in any way in the THA election. We are not, involved in any way. I mean, this is a small island, of course. If Mr. Duke or anybody else is in Port of Spain around the place, they're free to meet anybody. They can meet, they can talk, they can line if they want. But as far as any work, any institutional linkages, any campaigning and so on, we were not involved. We allowed the people of Tobago through their institutions to decide for themselves on the future of Tobago and their politics and policy. I just received a question from a reporter, which I'll just reiterate. We have also seen in the social media space some developments relating to CNC3, the media house, and issues of, issues I would say more conflictual, some issues. These are matters that aired itself. We did have, I believe, a conflict with a morning reporter, I believe a journalist in the morning, over a particular matter. Our members are free. They are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Our members and supporters are free to boycott a newspaper or a TV station or anything, or to watch or not to watch. They are free to do anything like that. I mean, people have the right to speak, but people have the right not to speak. And our members gave expression to their view. Some were very upset, as I was, incidentally, with that development on the morning program, I believe, some time ago. I was very upset. Our members gave vent to that. But it is not, of course, as the political leaders indicated. We have taken no decision to boycott any of the media houses in any particular way. But our members are free if they want to speak to a media house, or if not. We have also reminded our members, I believe PRO Kirk Mago has reminded our members that we ought to be vigilant when in touch with reporters and media and so on. So we will always be on the same page, and we will not be misinterpreted, and we will not give rise to conflict of this nature and so on. I believe, unless I'm mistaken, there's a CNC3 microphone in front of me now. So we continue to work with the media of Trinidad and Tobago, but our members, of course, being as upset as they were, one has to also, understand that within the context of the developments that we saw earlier. Yeah.
And if members have any more questions, let me just close.
Yes.
I just want to know if the opposition has any kind of comments on what's happening in Tobago, after the Tobago House of Assembly.
Sure. What I can say is that, of course, we are the opposition of Trinidad and Tobago, and in the coming days, we are going to have a parliamentary caucus, and that matter would be discussed, and whatever statement would be made by the opposition leader and the political leader of the UNC on that matter. But we will caucus on it in the coming hours and arrive at some type of statement and so on. But we are monitoring it as we ought to.
Okay, from what I understand, there are a number of Tobagonians who are planning to stand up, and that may include coming down to Trinidad and protesting in front of the Red House. Does the UNC plan to stand with Tobagonians on that? And that is involving autonomy, getting the autonomy so that they can handle their issues.
Sure.
Well,
I would remind, that would be discussed at our parliamentary caucus, but I would remind the national community that the Partnership Administration advanced a very comprehensive bill for Tobago's self-government. It was rejected by the PNM, rejected by the very PNM, incidentally. I say no more on this because I would leave it to the caucus to discuss in a much more comprehensive manner, and the opposition leader will speak to the country on this in the coming days.
May I say may I say two matters before we close. One, the United National Congress is calling on the relevant authorities to institute immediately a criminal forensic investigation into the purchase of the two fast catamaran vessels costing this country $1 billion and above. And also we want a criminal forensic investigation into the purchase of the two Cape-class patrol vessels, 58 meters in length, as it relates to that exorbitant price of $655 million TT dollars for these two vessels, when Australia Border Force bought that same vessel, no, the Australian Royal Navy bought that same vessel for 150 million TT, and for the both 300 million. Now, members of the media, may I, on behalf of the United National Congress and its illustrious political leader, Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, inform the media this morning that we, that is the United National Congress, will be hosting a roundtable, a powerhouse roundtable, to address this same matter of repealing the very infamous Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Amendment Act of 2020, which gutted Section 7 of the Parent Act and legalized thievery, banditry, and grand corruption in our nation. We will have a battery of powerful, independent speakers and presenters in the personalities of the following: former Minister of Finance in the Manning administration, that is Sister Karen Nunez Teixeira; former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ralph Maraj; the President of Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, Gary Aboud; former President of the Senate and legal luminary in the corporate world, Timothy Hamill Smith; and of course, the Honorable political leader, former Prime Minister, former Attorney General, and opposition leader temporarily, Kamla Persad-Bissessar. This is the panel that will be at work on Monday. The program begins. Now, this is taking place tomorrow. It begins, I believe, at 7:30 promptly, and will be aired on the UNC Facebook and YouTube channels, as well as radio and TV Jagrati and TV6. We would like to invite the entire population to become part and to join this historic and significant roundtable to have this anti-people, anti-worker, anti-good governance legislation repealed and replaced with the original provisions contained in Section 7 of the 2015 Act. So we'd like to extend that invitation to the public to take part, because procurement is very important for the health of our economy and the democracy of our country. If you have poor governance, poor procurement in the public sector, as we have seen, the PNM over the last 5 years have spent over $170 billion, and today on Transparency International Perception of Corruption Index, we remain at 86, going on 87 out of 180 countries, and a score of 40. 0 being most corrupt countries in the world, and 100 being the country with the least corruption. We are number 40. in the region, we are in the distinguished company, the last 3 distinguished company or countries, we are in the distinguished company of the following countries. Last, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname, and his good friend, Maduro, in Venezuela. These are the 3 most corrupt countries in the region. Trinidad and Tobago is last in the region. That is the legacy of Keith Christopher Rowley. And I want to say in closing, the United National Congress will be employing every legal means at its disposal to expose, isolate, alienate, and get rid of this government. This government must go. We will remove this government, but we will use all legal means to do so. We must have early elections because people are fed up of the thieving that is taking place in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.